holding a news conference. They're claiming election irregularities. It's been 2 months since judicial recounts have confirmed the NDP's razor-thin majority in this past BC election. Now, this focus today is once again on the riding of Surrey-Guildford, a critical riding this past election. We will be taking you live to that press conference coming up shortly. In the meantime, we do have Stuart Press, who is joining us now. He teaches political science as a lecturer at UBC. So, Stuart, again, few details confirmed about the announcement today. But what we do know, in the words of the BC Conservatives, is that they have concerns about what they call election irregularities. So what can you make of this term, this concern?
It's a good question, and it's essentially that term leaves the door pretty wide open to a variety of complaints. Everything from the way in which the votes were counted, and we know that it took several tries for elections in BC to find and count all the ballots in this previous election, which really wore on the nerves of British Columbians during the vote finalization process. It could also relate to the behavior of a candidate or a party. So we really have to wait and see in what direction does this press conference go.
And we also heard recently there was a complaint made about the process on January 3rd. So I want to know what happens when a party makes a complaint to Elections BC, as the Conservatives, again, they did do this last week. What is this process? Help us understand this a bit.
It's another good question because, again, this situation is highly unusual. There are opportunities to challenge a vote count process during the vote counting stage after a judicial recount is complete. For instance, there's a short window for a candidate or a party to request an additional recount or to challenge the process in some way. But that period is closed, and so now the complaint process that exists, it exists for candidates or electors, members of broader BC society to allege that something has happened to violate the terms of BC's Election Act. And the Chief Electoral Officer then has the opportunity to investigate, okay. And that can go in a lot of different directions as well.
All right, thank you so much. We just heard it starting now, so we're going to take you live right to that conference. Here's John Rustad.
Thanks for taking some time to come here this morning. We have some important information that we thought we should share with the media with regards to the election in 2024. There's been many people who have brought forward a tremendous amount of information to us about the election. A lot of it is, just people's opinions and thoughts about what had happened. And I intentionally did not come out and make any comments about any of this during the time leading up till now, because I felt that our democracy is important in this province. We need to be able to have confidence in the democratic process. We need to have confidence in the results. We need to have confidence in how business is conducted in this province by governments. And to that end, I didn't want to add into rumors or into conspiracy theories. I wanted to make sure that I dealt with facts, things that we could find, things that we could do research on. So since the election, we have had a group of people that have been looking into a number of things, a number of issues that have come up and that have been raised. And we felt it important at this point to share what we have found to date, but also to indicate that there is more work that still needs to be done with regards to this. We've heard many stories about, for example, non-Canadian citizens who have voted in this election. However, that's something that we can't prove, because obviously no one's going to be coming forward and putting up their hand saying, please have me eligible for a fine and put me in jail. So these are the types of things that are hard to follow up on in terms of it, which is one of the reasons why we'll have a recommendation associated with that as well. We found other cases where an individual went to vote and was told they couldn't vote because somebody had already voted. Somebody had already registered a vote in their name. Errors can be made. We understand those sort of things. Found another incident, for example, where an individual was registered as voting who said they didn't vote. Okay, once again, you don't know for sure how those things play out, but those are the kinds of things that we hear. But I think probably some of the more disturbing things that we have found is in particular in the riding of Surrey-Guildford. And Han Veer was our candidate here in Surrey-Guildford, and he's here to share a few words as well with regards to the work that he's been doing in terms of follow-up on the election. And in that particular riding, we found a case of a double vote, somebody who voted twice. We have found a case where there have been at least almost 24 ballots that were cast from people who are not registered or not currently, sorry, let me rephrase that, whose place of residence that was on Elections BC is not where they currently live. And so there's a follow-up that's needed to find out, just to make sure to know just where they did live. Did they live in the riding, or did they live outside of the riding and use a different address to be able to vote in the riding? One of the more serious issues we have found was associated with a care facility, a seniors home, where 21 mail-in ballots were cast. Mail-in ballots where the voting station was just 80 meters across the road from where this facility was located. And individuals in that facility have come forward with affidavits with regards to voting, regards to what happened associated with that. There's concern that these votes, that a third party has come in and been partaken and part of how these votes were cast and done. It is a serious concern that needs to be looked into with regards to an investigation. There are other issues that have come up around the whole process and what has gone on. For example, there was one individual, I just read about this morning, who just became a Canadian citizen 3 days before voting and was never asked whether or not they were a Canadian citizen when they voted. And to me, that's concerning, because the number one thing that Elections BC should be doing is to make sure that people who vote are Canadian citizens. That is the core of our democracy. That's the core of what we do. And so we're going to be making a number of recommendations, and I'm going to have Hanveer follow up and say some things after this. We're making a number of recommendations that need to be followed up on. And the first and foremost is to repeat our call for an independent review of the election process. What that independent review needs to look at is not just, these irregularities that we have found through the election process, through digging. They need also to quite frankly, to look at how the election was conducted by Elections BC. The fact that they are not focusing on making sure that there's Canadian citizenship for people that vote. That how can they follow up, and particularly for things like phone-in ballots and these types of things, to make sure that it is the actual person, that there is Canadian citizenship. The independent review also needs to look at the Elections Act and how the Election Act is set up and the priorities that are set up in the Election Act, and does there changes that are needed. Because after all, this current election that we just went through was acting on the Election Act of 2019, which was authored by David Eby. The whole process of this election, it rests on David Eby's shoulders when he was Attorney General in terms of what has come forward here. The next things that need to be looked at, so there's the three components of the independent review that needs to be looked at. We're making a recommendation that all photo ID that's issued by the British Columbia government should have a C on it if they are Canadian citizens. So that's your driver's license, your BC ID. And that's a way for Elections BC to make sure that people who vote are Canadian citizens. It's make sure to protect the integrity of the electoral process in British Columbia. And the last recommendation that we want to bring forward with this is we actually think there are many people who have voted who may not be Canadian citizens. We have heard of hundreds of these potential cases of issues. However, like I say, no one wants to come forward because they're worried about what may happen in terms of a fine or potential jail time. I think what I'd like to see is us to suspend the penalties of the Election Act for a 90-day period to allow for people to be able to come forward and tell us what has gone on, what happened, were they coerced to vote, what was the issues that may have happened. Allow this information to come forward without the penalties of the Election Act being applied. And the reason for this is, once again, to protect the integrity of the democratic process, to make sure that people can have confidence in our voting in British Columbia, to allow for Elections BC to be able to find the errors or the problems that have happened, to make sure that we can fix this so that elections going forward, people in this province can have full confidence that they are held, that they're conducted properly, and that there is nothing that goes on that shouldn't go on. We're in a situation now in British Columbia where whether it's leadership races or whatever the case may be, the rules are pretty lax in terms of whether Canadian citizenship. And we're about to see a federal leadership race going on, and who knows what those rules are going to be, whether it's going to be decided who the next Prime Minister is going to be by Canadian citizens or others in terms of leadership races. So there's a lot that needs to be looked at in this whole process of how we protect and how we support democracy and how democracy is undertaken in British Columbia. And so with that, I'd like to pass it over to Hanveer to share some comments.
Thank you, Mr. Rustad. As you know, I'm Hanveer Randhawa, so I ran for the election from Surrey-Guildford, electoral riding as a candidate for Conservative Party of B.C. So at the end of the election on October 19, there was a 103 vote lead, and with just a handful of votes after that, the lead was gone and I was trailing by 22 votes. So of course that raised reasonable concern. We asked for the voting list, the participation list from BC Elections, and BC Elections provided the list, but in quite a cumbersome manner. We asked for the list in categorized manner so we could see who has voted through mail-in ballots and who has voted through other alternative methods. But that was not provided to us. So with the support that we had at hand and with John Rustad's amazing support as well, we were able to conduct a review of who had voted in Surrey-Guildford riding and what contraventions possibly happened. So this particular lodge did stick out because there were 21 mail-in ballots which were casted from this lodge, and this lodge is literally across the street from the voting place, which is one of the schools. So that did raise further concerns. And under the section 109.01 of the Election Act, one individual can only assist another individual with the mail-in ballot package. So that raised a concern to us, but that also raises a bigger concern that this information was available to BC Elections, so why did not it raise a concern to them? But for us to conduct this review that we did, and we found 45 irregularities, contraventions, and the gap between the leading NDP candidate and myself is 22. So 45 irregularities we have found, possible irregularities at this point. So the gap is 22, and we are going to be bringing a petition in court shortly as well as to make the election in Surrey-Guildford invalid. Because the point at hand is that the justice must prevail and the democracy must be protected. The voices of these voters, whoever is voting for a reason. They want the right government, or they want their vote should be counted in a rightful manner. So this entire endeavor has not been easy, but we have finally, as Mr. Rustad has explained as well, there are 45 possible contraventions of the Election Act, and especially this lodge, as it did stick out. So we are asking BC Elections, and the complaint that you have a copy, they redacted, that we are asking BC Elections to do their thorough investigation into this, and also if it does point to irregularities, then other institutions similarly to the same should also be looked into. So that is where we sit with this. And Mr. Rustad, if you have anything else to add, sure, please.
So just to be clear, a complaint has been filed with Elections BC, and what we found in that facility, we have heard from people that have come forward and talked about similar issues with other facilities. And that to me is what is very concerning, because there may be a pattern. It's something that still needs to be investigated. We still need to be able to track down the work that's in there. We're going to continue doing the work that we can do to look at and to continue to follow up on this, but it's important now, I think, that Elections BC gets involved with its process, as well as the independent review, to be able to make sure that what is being done here is all revealed and all up and up, and that we can make sure with confidence going forward that the election process in British Columbia can be relied on and defended. So with that, I'd be happy to take any questions that the media may have. And I'll leave Brad to...
Let's just keep it orderly. We'll be here for a while, so we're going to try and answer as many questions as we can. Katie?
John, you mentioned the 21 votes at the care home, and you said affidavits from people in that care home. Can you detail what people in that care home said, what kind of concerns were raised, and why does it matter that they're across the street from a facility? Why can't they vote mail-in ballot if they want?
Of course, people have that right to be able to vote mail-in ballot. The issue is whether or not they're capable of doing that, and whether or not there was, an individual who participated in many people voting by mail. And so there's issues in terms of how that's brought forward. But in particular, the background or information that you have has the information that you're asking for. So I'd ask you to look for that.
And you came out on social media, and other party officials came out on social media saying that you accepted their election results. So why call it into question now? Is this feeding into more conspiracy theory type things on social media that tried to say the election was rigged?
One of the reasons I did not talk about any sort of issues associated with the election, and we accepted the election results of the day, is because we need to be able to have trust in Elections BC and in the process. And it can't just be based on rumors that create, potential concerns. So we wanted to make sure that we looked into this and we had actual data and hard information before we came forward with any sort of things. The reason for coming forward with this now is there's also a 90-day period from the time of the election before these sort of things can be filed. And so we have done the research and the work that we can, found what we have, and now are bringing it forward now at this time, which we feel is appropriate.
Justine?
Just first of all, some clarity. So you're taking this complaint to Elections BC, but are you going to the Supreme Court to seek to have this particular riding reviewed?
As the Conservative Party of British Columbia, we are not taking this to court. However, Han Veer has made a decision to file within court, and so that's his right to be able to do that.
Okay, maybe you could explain why you're doing this and not the party.
So basically, within 3 months from the contravention, you can bring a petition into court. As a candidate, you have the right to bring that petition to have the election declared invalid under Section 150. So right now, I'm a lawyer by profession, so I have decided to handle it on my own, the petition in court. So we are filing that in court, the petition, because the irregularities, of course, it takes time. It's not an easy job when you have 20,000 voters lists presented to you without any indication as to who voted how. So it does take a lot of time to, and of course, people are not that forthcoming to tell you they have voted wrongly. But at the end of the day, of course, we have the surfaced irregularities are 45, and the gap is 22, and there is usually a magic number test behind these petitions. So, but irrespective of a petition in court for this, more important is the democracy must be protected. And these people have had the faith in democracy. They vote, they take the time. I've been on ground knocking down doors 4 times in my riding. I can't let them down. So there's a lot of people in my riding as well asking me to take this further. So that's the step we are taking.
And then if I could just thank you.
Thank you.
Follow up, Mr. Rustad. You said you were avoiding just feeding conspiracy theories. And you laid out the specifics of what you think went wrong here. But you then also said, well, David Eby might be responsible for this because he was the AG at the time. I'm wondering if you can elaborate on what specifically you think Mr. Eby might have done that led to irregularities in this.
So, Ned, you can go back and look at the changes in the 2019 in terms of the Election Act that were brought forward, which created the opportunity to be able to vote from anywhere in the province. It created a number of things that sort of allowed for less scrutiny from Elections BC in terms of the electoral process. And so my perspective on this is that the person that holds the pen is ultimately responsible for the legislation that is being enacted. And so that's why I raised that issue.
Okay, 1, 2, 3.
So you talk about the laws, you talk about the way this election was handled. Obviously the recount process was long, but what specifically changes would you like to see made to the Elections Act if there's something to be found there? You talked about 2019, changes, you talked about voting from anywhere. Would you like to see that, rescinded, or what changes would you like to see made to that?
What I would like to see in British Columbia is to be assured that the people in British Columbia know that it's only Canadian citizens who are voting, that there is nothing going on behind the scenes in terms of coercing or anything else that could potentially have happened in terms of gathering votes, and make sure that, like I say, the democratic process in this province is protected. That's what is most important, so that people have confidence in a government that is elected.
And then as a follow-up, this complaint, I know it's broad as well, but it's also mostly focused on Surrey-Guildford in terms of the specifics. Are there any other ridings or any other places where you have these types of concerns, and will you be bringing forward any other issues to Elections BC?
So there are other ridings that certainly we have had a number of things that have come forward. There's no question. And in some cases, those are very, very significant. It's a lot of work to be able to track down this sort of stuff, to be able to bring it forward from a factual perspective, which is why we're not bringing that stuff forward at this point. But we are going to continue with the investigation. But this is also why it's very important to look and to have the penalties under the Election Act suspended for a period of time, to allow for these things to come forward, so that we can bring it forward and fix these problems without there being those sort of consequences, so people can have that opportunity to come forward and do the right thing and talk about just what's happened here.
You're up.
You mentioned that Premier David Eby was an author to a lot of the sweeping changes that took place this time around. But at what point do you think that BC elections should be responsible for some of the irregularities and discrepancies that are being found, including, like the 861 ballot that wasn't counted, and also other discrepancies over 60 write-ins? When do you start to put them in question?
It's one of the reasons why when I call for an independent review, it's not just a review of the election and what it went on during this election, but an independent review of Elections BC itself, of the way it conducted the election, to be able to make sure that if there are problems and issues, and I've heard many stories, and these are things that are just stories, so I'm reluctant to come forward with and talk about them without actually having the evidence on it. But many stories in terms of some of the way that Elections BC had conducted this election. So I think it's important that there is an independent review, not just of the election, but of Elections BC and of the Elections Act, to look at strengthening the electoral process in British Columbia.
Some of those changes included tabulators. There are stories of ballots being taken home. There's lots of concerns over phone voting and things like that. I haven't heard you mention any of those things. Are those going to be issues you are also calling into question as well?
Those are all things that my hope is, as part of the independent review, will come forward. And I'm assuming, and maybe I shouldn't assume, but I would request that an independent review has an opportunity for the public to be able to come forward with their concerns and issues, and to be able to do the follow-up and to look into it. That's the key of having an independent review that looks at these things, which is why the review should not just be done internally by Elections BC or through an all-party committee or any of that type of process. That's why this needs to be independent, put out there, so that people can have full confidence in terms of what a review could potentially reveal.
Hi, John.
Rob?
I wanted to get my head around it. Are you alleging, or your party alleging, or you're alleging that, who are you alleging was involved in bad or inappropriate or fraudulent behavior? Are you alleging Elections BC made mistakes? Is it the NDP? Is it Gary Begg in that riding? Who are these allegations directed towards?
So it's obviously difficult to say exactly, which is one of the reasons why there needs to be the independent review to look at just who may have been involved. What we do know is that there have been donations made to the NDP. There is obviously relationships there that connect this, but whether or not that has part of it, that's something that needs to be determined either through that independent process or through some other process.
And then by way of follow-up, I'm just trying to get my head around what's going forward. You called for these reviews, and then in terms of court challenges, correct me if I'm wrong, but the party could bring a court challenge by the 19th or 20th, but they've chosen not to. Honveer has decided to bring us the same court challenge on his own behalf. The effect of that, if it's successful, would be a by-election in that riding, I guess, and you've said there's 45 irregularities you've identified, which would be enough to trigger the by-election. Assuming that's all correct, why is the party not sort of putting its money where its mouth, so to speak, if it feels like there's these issues?
Yeah, there's a lot of work that the party still needs to be involved in and do, but with regards to the court process, the legal process, we felt that the best process forward was for the party to not be involved in that legal challenge. So it's just a decision that that the party has made.
But Honduras is bringing that legal challenge.
That's, you want to?
Yes, that's a very good question. So I am bringing forward that court challenge because this effort is bind in two ways. Court challenge brings the possibility of a by-election to come forward if the court finds that contraventions to stand and our number of contraventions are over what was the difference between the votes. And at the same time, all these efforts are in hand with the party's efforts of bringing a bigger picture to light, which is that the democracy must prevail. We need to make sure that these things don't go on going forward, that if somebody's voting, their vote should matter, because when there are contraventions as such, then we have issues as to other people feeling discouraged to vote. So there are two things here. So one, yes, as a lawyer, I'm bringing it forward on my own, the petition, with the party's assistance. But at the same time, parties also taking the actions in the background to bring the bigger picture to light, yes. Thank you.
Okay, we're gonna do 3 more.
Mr. Rustad, Happy New Year, both of you. Just wondering, as you know, federally, foreign interference issues have been identified, and the international student aspect in terms of non-residents were implicated, at least in one by-election in Ontario. Do you see any of that kind of pattern, or do you have that concern here?
We have some concerns about that for sure. It's one of the reasons why there needs to be this independent look at this, and it's also one of the reasons why we want to suspend the penalties associated with the Elections Act so that we can gather this information and get this stuff brought forward and fix the problem as opposed to just going after individuals through an act. I mean, the goal here is to make sure that we enhance and protect our democracy and our democratic process in British Columbia.
Question for you, you are a lawyer. Is this, and you're choosing to take this forward yourself, is this, that could be a positive or a negative, like you know it so well that you are in the weeds on it, or you are empowered in a way that someone else wouldn't be. So where does your legal training come into this? Like what's driving this? And it's a lot of work.
Yes, running an election is a lot of work. And once you do that, and if there is when you see if we would not have found the contraventions, this would be in vain, and there's no point in making a petition. But as far as my legal background goes, as a lawyer, you're just given the skills to present a point. But of course, this is not what I do for a living. This is the first time that I will be bringing a petition of this sort. But I am equipped with at least the court procedures. So it is something that I believe it should be done, not just for me or my writing or the party. It is a bigger picture at hand that at the end of the day, when I have knocked those doors and those people have voted, and if they're taking the time to vote, they believe in the system being correct. And we are not saying, or I'm not saying, who is wrong or right, but there are gaps here, which should be looked into. And I'm hopeful that my petition and the court action on this would shed a better light on it. So going forward, at least, regardless of what the outcome would be, there could be better measures in the legislation which would address these gaps about mail-in ballot being taken so lightly. So that is where these kind of problems might not surface. So that's what my basic goal is, yeah.
Bond?
Mr. Rustad, if the evidence that you've compiled were persuasive and might lead to the result being vacated, if you thought that was likely, wouldn't you be leading the action yourself? And you're not.
There was a decision made by the executive of the Conservative Party of British Columbia to not pursue this in court as a party. However, we are doing the work behind the scenes. We're continuing to gather information. There's more investigative work that needs to be done, and in terms of that particular riding, and that's why we are doing that work and obviously providing that support and work to Honvier.
Time is running out. I can't, wondering how you think you can gather any more evidence between now and the 19th. Is the party going to help out on the legal bills for what could be a long case?
We'll have to see how that process goes in terms of it. We have made decisions around that. At this particular point, though, where our focus is once again doing that investigative work, tracking down the individuals that we've mentioned in terms of some of that additional information that needs to be collected, looking for anything else in the riding. As part of this, of course, by putting our finger on this and talking about this, this now creates an opportunity for other people to come forward. We have had other people come forward and indicate that there is potential problems in other facilities and other places, and so we're going to be looking at that. And actually, one of the interesting things is we've actually had some NDP insiders give us some hints as to where to start looking at some things. So we are continuing to do that work.
Last one.
Yes, this is a question for either of you. Could you tell me more about the gathering of this information from Argyle Lodge? Like, who brought this forward? Who were the affidavits given to? How do you know who those people were voting for? Maybe a little bit more about that process of uncovering this information.
Do you want to answer that?
Yeah. So what triggered us to look into this lodge is a lot of the mail-in ballots, by reasonable differential kind of look at who voted when. There were a lot of these mail-in ballots in the last 630 votes which were counted after the election. So the same address was popping up. So as a reasonable inquiry, we knocked over there, we spoke with someone and the volunteers from the team. Things started coming out which were not adding up. There were people saying that we never voted, but they have voted. And then further inquiries led to the point that these people are saying they were made to just put across. You have that part of the complaint redacted, however. And the reason for the redaction is those people are already expressing situations where they were intimidated as per their statements. So we don't want that further situation they be put into. So that's why those redacted complaint has been provided to you. So that raises a bigger concern. Numbers game is one thing. A person was non-resident, still voted within the residence, the electoral district. But this is much bigger. So this led to us spending more time, the team, and then, of course, if somebody's coming forward and giving a statutory declaration, a sworn statement, then clearly there is something that needs to be looked into.
And reading through that, I see that, it says that there's a donation made by the manager of the Argyle Lodge of $1,400 to the NDP, I believe that's what it says. Are you suggesting that that manager did something himself or themselves to force these people to vote a certain way? And will that person be named in this suit? And who else will be named in this suit?
I will just briefly speak on that because that investigation is done by Conservative Party of B.C. So Mr. Rustad can speak on it, but all that investigation I'm aware of is that what has revealed is this particular named person has made a donation. And as far as the legal petition is concerned, the intention is not to sue anyone particular. The intention is just to go under the act and get done what is right. It's not against someone per se. It is against, not even against. A petition is under the Elections Act that there are irregularities which needs to be counted and looked into, and do they lead to the fact that the election would be invalid, right? So no, as far as the petition goes, the legal action goes, I'm handling. I'm not particularly pursuing some person, but these are the things which surfaced during investigation by Conservative Party of B.C. So they brought it forward.
All right, thanks everybody. Appreciate everybody coming out this morning.
When will the court filing be made?
In the due course, but you know the deadline, so before
Yeah,
that, yes.
so you've got to get it done by the 19th?
Yes. Thank
And
you.
will you accept the court's decision on your term?
Of course. See, I accepted whatever happened that day. If these things would not have surfaced, of course, it would be wasting of everyone's time. Court is final, and all I require is that, let's look into this. And if the judge looks into this, and at the end of the day, we were not correct, but it's our job to do what we're doing. And that's okay. We move on.
Same with Elections BC's investigation. They confirmed they've received a complaint, but wouldn't provide any further information on timelines, et cetera. I guess both to you and to Mr. Rustad, will you accept Elections BC's findings when it looks into the information you provided?
Let me answer
Yes.
that one. Thanks. So with regards to Elections BC, it's one of the reasons why we're calling for, as part of the independent review, an independent review of Elections BC itself, in terms of the process that has gone forward. Obviously, Elections BC is the authority. If they go into it and come out, then we have to accept their information, accept what they've come with. But it does need to have this review of these processes, and it has to be done independently.
And is that something that the government has to agree to? Like, how would the inquiry process get started?
Inquiry process would something that would be started as an act from the legislature, and so obviously government would need to support the idea of going to public inquiry unless it was ordered by a judge.
Can I just confirm the 45 irregularities? Is this care home? This is sort of the crown jewel in your case. This is the biggest instance of irregularities.
So the total 45 irregularities does include the 21 mail-in ballots which were casted from this lodge as well. But even if we minus 21, let's say the whole 21 out of 45, we still end up with 424. So, but we have 3 people who have confirmed from this lodge that they voted in a certain way, as you can see, which was not as per their will.
Okay, folks.
Okay, thanks everyone.
So we just heard again from John Rustad there and the Conservatives to do with what they're describing as election irregularities. So again, it's been 2 months since judicial recounts confirmed this NDP's razor-thin majority in the BC election there. And in the riding of Surrey-Guildford, a lot of that focus was just there from Honveer Singh Randhawa. So the party is claiming, again, these election irregularities in that critical riding. And I'm just going to quickly summarize what we just heard. So John Rustad started by saying that democracy is important, that they need to have confidence in the democratic process. He said he's taken the time to go into the facts, to do the research. Since the election, he says that irregularities have been unearthed or brought to the attention of the Conservative Party, including, he says that, and they mentioned many, so we're going to go through some of them. You can, of course, keep reading up on this coverage later today, but he says non-Canadians voting in the election and issues with roughly 20 mail-in ballots, but he says that they can't necessarily prove that. An individual, they say, was also told they couldn't vote because someone else voted in their name. They also allege incidents in Surrey-Guildford where they say they found a case of a double vote, someone who voted twice, at least 24 votes cast from people whose place of residence on Elections BC is not where they currently live, according to John Rustad again. And they also raised a few issues from Argyle Lodge in Surrey. They say that some residents there deny requesting mail-in ballots or being aware that a provincial election was taking place. So those are just some of the allegations they're putting forward. And they are asking to look into these irregularities, looking to see how Elections BC conducted this and looking at the Election Act as well. Another part that John Rustad mentioned was saying that all photo IDs should have Cs on them to show if people are Canadian citizens. And we heard from the Conservative candidate there who wants to bring a petition to court about the process of how that all happened in Surrey-Guildford as well. So again, they claim that these concerns need to be taken seriously, especially as we have another federal election that's coming up. And again, Surrey-Guildford, just want to take a moment to talk about the significance of it. Overall, after a judicial review, they found that there was a difference of just 22 votes. Again, there was that recount. BC Supreme Court judge had declared that Gary Begg of the NDP was elected. And it also meant that Premier David Eby's New Democrats held onto their one-seat majority in this past election. So that, again, was just some of the summary of what we heard from this press conference. And to give us a little bit more of analysis, help us make more sense of this, Stuart Press joins us now. He teaches political science as a lecturer at UBC. Thanks again for joining us. So, yeah, a lot of, we heard a lot there. What do you have to make about what the Conservatives are claiming here?
Yeah, there's quite a lot to unpack. The press conference went in a number of different directions, but overall it seems like there's, if you like, three avenues of action that the Conservatives are pursuing or calling for action. One is a complaint filed with Elections BC to examine these irregularities related to people voting improperly or the issues with the mail-in ballots you were just describing. There were also some issues around fundraising for the NDP that were raised that the Elections BC in theory could investigate as well. And if there is a determination that something inappropriate happened, then Elections BC, first of all, decides whether to investigate, but then if there is a fire that found where we now have smoke, then there would be a possibility of monetary penalties on those responsible for the infractions of the Elections Act. But beyond that, we also have on if you like, a larger scale, we have a call for a wholesale review of BC's election apparatus through an independent inquiry. And so this is a continuation of a conversation that was begun in the immediate aftermath of the 2024 election, where in light of the challenges of the recount process and the vote counting, the use of vote counting machines, the vote anywhere provisions, which seem to create some complications in Elections BC actually coming to a final vote tally, there was a debate about, and still an unresolved debate about how the province should go ahead to clean up that and ensure the elections going forward are going to be conducted effectively. And David Eby and the NDP suggested there should be an all-party committee looking into the matter. And Mr. Rustad called for an independent inquiry. So this is effectively the next piece of that conversation, giving a lot of reasons why an independent inquiry is necessary and a range of things for that inquiry to look into, including the 2024 election itself, but also the Elections Act and its structure in here, calling into question what the contents of that act, which was most recently amended under the auspices of the Attorney General at the time, David Eby, and so it becomes a political attack as well. And then finally, to review the work of Elections BC, given the challenges of that counting process. And so those are the first two avenues. The third then is a court challenge by Mr. Randhawa of the Conservatives, essentially petitioning the court to examine this vote in Surrey-Guildford one more time and determine whether there are grounds to essentially sufficient votes that are questionable or inappropriately cast to set the result aside and have a by-election. And so that is the right of a candidate to make that challenge, and there are provisions within the Elections Act to do that. Very rarely used, but we are going to see what happens now.
Yeah, and I want to ask you more about that. His call to do that in court. Have you seen this before? I mean, how is this unprecedented? What do you make of that?
We have judicial recounts after just about every election. They're common. This is uncommon. I don't know that it has ever happened before in BC in quite this way. There probably there may well be an example from history that I'm not aware of, but I'm not aware of it. This is uncharted ground.
And what about the timing of this? Why do you think does that have any significance or relevance right now for when they decided to speak about this?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I think we got hints of the timing in the answer. Mr. Rustad suggested he wanted to be sure that there was something to talk about before going ahead with this press conference and these additional allegations, if you like. I think. So there was probably some work trying to collect whatever information they could, and I'd say the information presented by Mr. Rustad so far is inconclusive. It is alleging a variety of questions around the margins. It's only relevant in Surrey-Guildford because the margins are so small, just 22 votes separating first and second place. And so every election is going to have a few challenges. It's a human endeavor. It's a significant undertaking. And so we are seeing calls to look into this more closely because of that.
Okay, I'm curious about the bigger picture here. Okay, so we had the NDP government, we had the judicial reviews come in, we had these recounts happening. We hear about this now. What effect can this really have?
Again, a good question. It is in some ways uncharted ground. We have very specific limits on challenging electoral results because we as a democracy effectively need to move on and accept an electoral result at some point. And that point generally is after the final count is certified. And so we are now trying to open up that box again that the Conservatives are with this challenge. And so it is a difficult position for us all to be in. In one sense, the court challenge may put to rest the allegations that apparently are floating around, perhaps on social media and in conservative circles. So they're going to have their day in court, quite literally, and then we can move on from those allegations once the final determination is made in this court challenge. Big picture, if let's just say the court does set aside this electoral result, we would have a by-election. There would be effectively a tie between the Conservatives and the Greens in opposition and the NDP for that time, 46-46. Given that the NDP and the Greens already have a working arrangement, a cooperation and responsible government accord, as they're calling it, that won't change the balance of power in the legislature meaningfully, but it does continue to give fuel to the fire questioning our elections in BC. And I think that's the bigger issue here, that there's a lack of trust in our democratic institutions, and it really is incumbent on all parties to do something about that.
Yeah, and I'm going to ask you about that a little bit later. But to our audience who's watching today, what are the key things that voters should really know following this press conference?
I think voters should know that the election was conducted fairly. It was conducted in a way that was in accordance with the Elections Act. There are always possible irregularities at the margins, and those specific irregularities that are being mentioned by the Conservatives now will be investigated both by Elections BC if they see reason to do so, and a court if they see reason to do so. So the evidence will have to be brought forward. So beyond that, the results of the election are trustworthy, and there is work to be done in terms of making sure that all the necessary procedures are in place, that trust can be in place going forward. There is a balance always between ensuring that our procedures are effective, but also that we don't create conditions to scrutinize and question people's ability to participate as well. And I was a little concerned to hear the constant refrain of essentially non-Canadians getting involved in elections as a way to potentially cast aspersions on the participation of newcomers to the country, those who have not been in Canada long as citizens, but they still have a right to vote. So if somebody became a citizen 3 days before the election, that could be a cause for celebration. They're able to take part in the election if they meet all the criteria, but that's not how it's being framed here. So I think we have to be very careful with this issue. Foreign interference is something we want to minimize and eliminate if possible, but we don't want to create a cloud of suspicion over a subset of the population either.
And I'm just curious quickly, in a minute, if you can just summarize, but what do you think this conference tells us about the voting process in BC? How delicate is it? Like, what can you say about that?
I think it really drives home yet again that this is a highly polarized political environment where our electoral result really was balanced on a knife edge. If you can raise questions about a couple of dozen votes, you can throw into question an electoral result, which is what we're seeing here. So that's one piece. I think it also suggests that there is a much higher willingness to question institutions that normally we trust implicitly in Canadian politics and in BC. Elections BC is good at their work. And they found the irregularities that were reported on and incorporated into the recount during the fall recount process. And so there is broad reason to trust these institutions, but we need to reinforce those going forward.
Well, Stuart, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for tuning into that press conference with us, your analysis, everything. Again, Stuart Press here from UBC, a political science lecturer there. Thank you again for your time.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
And there you go. So you can, again, read more about this on our website. We'll be continuing to follow this tonight. And thank you so much for tuning in. That is it for now. You're watching CBC News BC. We'll have more on this press conference coming up soon.